Okay, sorry for the little inconvenience. This is the type of thing that happens when you're on vacation with your personal computer, trying to uh, figure out how to share your ideas across the world. So first, thank you so much for the organizers and specifically for the community of DMPonline to allow me to continue sharing my opinions that I started in the International Digital Curation Conference in February. If you can go one slide down, I can just sort of talk a little bit about the the meaning of all this. Yeah, exactly. So just take me to the content. Thank you so much. So basically, what I presented, I can tell you a little bit of a story about why I presented and how I presented it in the IDCC. I had this idea of maybe rethinking why we are using DMPs, and I sent it as an abstract to the people in the conference, assuming that it would be rejected, and I would understand why are we not thinking like this. Instead of being rejected, it was accepted, and then I say, okay, now I have to think about it properly and justify my idea. So for that, the presentation here is a shorter version of what I did in Edinburgh, but also a little bit more in depth, because I would like to show a clear example of how this actually will work. That is, I will start with a sort of short story of what a data management plan is and how I think that we should kind of need to go back to the basis of what we actually would need. And then I realized something also in Edinburgh, that is that there's this new term called intellectual assets and knowledge valorization that is not that well known in the community. So what I did for this presentation is to tackle specifically those terms and why do I think that an enhanced DMP can help not only data stewards like myself, but researchers, principal investigators, and everyone in the open science community to rethink what are we actually reporting in DMPs. And for that, basically, I tackle it through the point of view of the smart metrics and the technology readiness levels. So I will detail them shorter than what I did in Edinburgh, because I would like just to go more in detail into point 4 there, the example of how to actually draft and map smart metrics from the point of view of a researcher. The idea there is that for the community, hopefully here, you will see how many of these ideas actually converge with all the new advances happening regarding measurement, machine actionable DMPs, and everything else that we've been discussing the whole day. So if that's okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So this is the short story. I put this little broccoli there to say, like, well, this is how it kind of started. In the 60s, a DMP was basically a path towards making sure that you didn't forget anything in your research project. Specifically in 66, and it started with engineering. I'm an engineer, that's why I knew the story. Sort of tackles the idea of how to properly develop, let's say, workflows of research, including data collection and analysis, without actually losing knowledge that you've created during the path. And as I said at the end of this slide, basically today is considered needed for every research project in general, but sadly, I feel it has become like one more paper that researchers should fill for the founders and not the tool that it used to be. So if that is clear, please, let's go one slide down. And I would say, before we go and explain what I believe an enhanced DMP can actually provide everyone in the open science community, let's stop. Second broccoli of the day, sorry, but that is, we need to tackle down the term of intellectual asset. You've seen it in my presentation, but basically, regarding the European recommendation from 2022, an intellectual asset is considered to be covering any result, service, or product generated by any research and innovation activities. So for examples of that would be patents, copyright, trademarks, publications, but it also includes business models, not just software, not just data. It also includes technologies, how-tos, prototypes. Basically, this is what we should be helping researchers report in data management plans, not just, let's say, publications with DOIs and some software with a Git and maybe a data set with another DOI. So this is important to me to make sure that it's clear for all of us. Of course, you can interrupt me whenever you want. It's clear for us, what are we trying to do with an enhanced DMP? We're trying not just to report the intellectual assets that a research activity would have as outcome, but also to track how those intellectual assets have been developed during the project. So Everything else I left there so people can keep reading about the aspects of how the European Union is actually expecting us, so the organization, communities, let's say, our communities, to sort of self-regulate how are we going to actually tackle and manage intellectual assets. So we'll see. And important, of course, is that we're focusing with this approach to define what knowledge valorization is. But if you want to read more, there's the link. Let's go into the specific example from Enhanced DMPs. So what I proposed in February in Enhanced DMPs, and if you want to go into detail, I wrote an article for the journal, so then you can just read in detail what I mean is an Enhanced DMP shouldn't be just one more requirement from the funder, but an actual valuable tool for research projects management in general. This might include, or this might help the researchers to do the planning, the documenting, and the executing, actually. So the third part, the executing of the open science research, meaning you can actually record and change over time the information of how the thing evolves. So the third point there to me, and this is important, is this actually means that in order to have an effective research data management plan, you have to have, let's say, a good kind of curation within your research data management. And that is, to me, important from the point of view of a data steward, because what I believe we should do as data stewards is not just sharing what the policies means into guides for the researchers, that would be the basics of it, but also to sort of help the paradigm shift in the minds of the researchers, what actually means to properly record and properly track their intellectual assets across the project. So the three pillars that I put there is basically smart metrics that I will describe next, that just basically should be able to map the objectives and work packages and even the deliverables that you have in your proposal into something that you can track over time. The TRLs, or the technology readiness levels, that is, would be your internal way to assess how your intellectual assets are evolving. And then, for example, if you learn through your project that what you promise or you plan to have at the beginning actually will change as the final outcome, you have a justification why the thing evolved. During today's presentation, someone mentioned that it's very tricky to understand why, if you promise something in the DMP, especially if the DMP was written by an AI, what you propose, what you bring as an outcome at the end is very different. How you justify that can be actually justified by internal assessments such as technology readiness levels. And of course, fair, because the idea is, at the end of the day, even if it's a tool for research, for researchers to actually manage their assets, it has to be machine actionable at the end of the day. So we need machine readability, and for that, parametrics would allow us to do so. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what smart metrics means at the end of the day is just to use a smart approach. Smart meaning specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So basically, the quickest way to describe this, so I don't go into detail here and I can just go to detail into the example afterwards, is smarts can help a researcher, even the researcher planning the project, the researcher coordinating the project, or the researcher actually executing the project, so all levels of researching, let's say, to manage expectations within the consortium, meaning each person has a role to play because it's properly defined by smart metrics, and each person has an expectation of other members on the consortium regarding the development of the intellectual asset that they promised or they coordinated to do. And to me, that's important. You will see it in the example just now. But to me, that's important, that in order to figure out along the time that you develop this, if you were right in your estimation at the beginning, or if you were not, a great example, a great rule to check or to refer is a technology readiness level. So if you check here the levels from 1 to 3, it's just basically primary research. You're trying to figure out something as a proof of concept. If you declare your asset as a proof of concept at the beginning of your project, no one, but specifically the founders, cannot reject your results if your results are not an actual finished tool, because you already promised a proof of concept. But if your project is piling up from a proof of concept that already existed in the previous project, maybe your promise or your planned intellectual asset at the end of the project could be a demonstrator. If you don't get up to a demonstrator, because let's say month by month or task by task, you realize that you were aiming too high in your DMP, so in your enhanced DMP, that should be, as we heard before from the machine actionable DMPs, a live document that actually evolves and has versioning over time, should track that evolution of your interpretation of actually how your research was planned and how it went and how it was reported. So all of that information should be there. And a great example to how to self-evaluate yourself as a consortium should be the technology readiness levels. Please, if we go to the next slide, we can go into how it used to be and my little example of how I hope it could be with a more specific in-depth detail. So it used to be basically like this. We have a Gantt chart with the project line, we have the task, we have sort of some time for each of the tasks, and we have some milestones, and we just run with it. So a data management plan here is sort of describing some of the activities described here based on how big the data would be, or what are you planning to do with it, and how are you planning on sharing it. And again, like the example that we described, if the DMP is written by an AI or is written by copy-pasting old versions, researchers forget that the data management plan exists until they start publishing. And then only then they read backwards and say, oh, what did we say we would do? So then again, the data management plan becomes just one document. It doesn't become a live document and doesn't become an actual management tool. So let's go to the first step, and then I'll describe it very slowly because usually I had an animation, but now let's read it all together from top left to bottom right. So basically, this would be an example. Let's say you have, as drafting a project, work package 1. Within work package 1, you have task 1, and task 1 has 5 activities. So the first thing you're planning, this is an example, just a very general one to define what an intellectual asset can be, is to define the data collection. The second thing that you're doing is to actually do the data set collection. That is what I call, or we call here, a specific asset 2.1. You will see why then. Then the activity 3 should be the data processing of the data collecting. We can call that the specific asset 3.1. And then last but not least, you have the activity 4 that is drafting the paper, and the activity 5 actually submitting a paper. So in this case, S11, so the first intellectual asset there would be the paper. So you had, as a consortium, a plan to have a paper. But within the paper, because you're trying to be as openly accessible as possible, and you're trying to do as better as possible open science, you have thought out, you're going to collect data, you're going to process data, maybe I have an asset related to my data set, and maybe I have an asset related to my data processing. So for example, Git, Jupyter Notebook, something that actually does the processing because you believe that that is an asset. An asset should be something that is not just part of the activities of research and innovation, but is actually useful to share. The question would be, if let's say your processing is just making a sum and dividing the amount of parts, then you don't need that. Then you can consider at this point, this is not an asset that I would need. If you describe it like that in your enhanced DMP, the funder cannot ask, where is the software? Because you already described that the software won't be an intellectual asset. It would be just part of the research that we will do, but the intellectual asset itself would be, for example, here, a data set to be shared. So let's go a little bit down, and it says deliverable 1. No, sorry, in the same slide. Thank you. So deliverable 1 would be the intellectual asset number 1. The name of that, I put publication paper 1, version 1.0. That is our specific asset 1.1, meaning, let's say it's a type open access publication. Therefore, you need to start thinking your publications and your ways of publishing. This is all during pre-production, let's say. It's all during proposal stage. And for that, you have dependencies, meaning that what are the human resources you're going to need? So A11. The machine resources you're going to need, A12, you will see them described later. And then you would have some use method. Let's say if you consider that would be a software code to be shared because it's an intellectual asset that you will develop within the project, then you mark it as intellectual asset 3.1, and you define where and how, meaning you will do it in a GitHub and you will have a license of Apache 2.0. That's an example, right? Then we have the fourth dependency, that is the collected data. I mark it in bold there because that's the one that we would go into in deep to describe all smart metrics for one intellectual asset. I've chosen data because This is the one that most researchers really need to understand how to share properly. And then last but not least, the fifth dependency would be the submission to whatever journal you already agreed on that would be part of your asset, meaning your article. So S2, let's say, means specific metric number 2. In specific metric number 2, I open S21, that is a data set or multiple data sets collected and shared between the consortium for the paper number 1, that is the intellectual asset 1.1. From work package 1, task 1, activity 1, related to deliverable 1. That would be the description of the asset. From now on, you just deal with the asset, but because you recorded in your enhanced DMP what that means, it goes directly to that specific, it goes related to that specific metric itself, or sorry, asset itself. So metric S2.1, as described there, entails an M2, so SM, M2X, meaning what are the measurable metrics for specifying the intellectual asset 2? When are we happy to say we have a data set that we can share? And then I broke it down into 3 simple metrics. For example, M21 would be a dataset quality standard. If you are working within a community, you know standards of quality, so you are sure that the quality of the data is there because you are following standards. Second one would be a dataset formatting standard. That would be, again, if you're already working with a community, in order to actually have the I in fair interoperability, you need to work with formatting standards, so you can put all that. So this is basically a description of all the details for each of the assets that you are entailing towards having before doing it. And then last but not least, the domain-specific repository. That is the question of how are you planning on developing this? How are you planning on publishing this? And that is, for example, a domain-specific repository community, like, for example, Zenodo, with a specific curation policy, like, for example, a CC BY license. So that is basically a short description of S and M of this asset. If we go down one more, we see how this keeps going towards fair, so to a smart in general. So then we go to A. So for A, we see in relation to this M metric that we just described, we would have A to X, that is the achievable metrics. And for achievable metrics for a specific intellectual asset that is aligned with S2, M2, I assign, just an example, the human resources required for this to happen. Let's say the researcher assigned to the data collection, and the machine resources required for S21 to happen. Basically, let's say the equipment assigned to the collecting of the raw data. So those are the aspects that then a principal investigator or a work package leader can assign to specific people, assign to specific setups. And this is where, by collecting this information in this way, it's much easier to make it machine actionable if you put it as part of a data management plan, or at least readable, because it would be very easy to say a human resource there would be, I don't know, an ORCID number. So if we go down below, then don't worry, we're almost finishing there. The thing is, we're already in R, and this is interesting because we had conversations before this about how different policies from different institutions affect the actual research. So the idea is, in an institution level interest, the R would be the relevant metric for everything else that happened to here. So S2, M2, A2, that would be what are relevant aspects from individual policies from individual institutions regarding this asset, meaning this data set that we are planning on sharing in Zenodo with specific license. So you can say this asset is in line with the governance of member X, because in the governance of one of the members of the consortium is saying, yes, we are happy to make data as shareable as possible. Then you can say, in line with the mission statement and open science of member Y, and then you can say maybe this university has doesn't have a data governance, but it has a mission statement, so we can just quote that. And last but not least, when at the beginning, you can have a long-term vision of what open science would be for your institute or your company, and then you can just point at that document to say, we are in line to what we said. This is just a description of what a data governance is, so there's no need. But just as a summary here is, you have the asset 2 with the metric, so with the asset 2 with the specific metrics up to R. So the only thing missing now is T. So if you go one below, T is the one that we were already doing, the time bounds. So this is the only thing that actually really sort of happening already within work packages and deliverables. That is how long we are planning on doing this. So the work package 1, task 1, activity 1 to 5 would last between month whatever and month whatever. I don't know if I put an example there. So month Y to my set, or 3 to 6, or something like that. So then full on describe like this, then you have all the information there as a full on detail, not just what are you planning on doing. So not only answering the general questions of a DMP, but enhanced in the way that specific actors and specific resources should be defined as part of the asset to be had. And also, because you're defining an asset list, you're not just saying, I'm just going to do some publication and we'll see what else we're publishing. You're also planning what else you're publishing. So if you go to the last slide there, I try to make a summary there. And summarizing this mapping that a researcher can do and applying to any other, if you already have, I don't know, Trello or any other project management tool, the problem of the DMP and the problem of the management tool is not that the tool is not technologically developed. The problem is, what are we putting in? So what I'm describing here is rethink the input for the DMP and rethink the input for any research management tool. That's why I'm trying to do this as technology agnostic as possible, very general. So a summary would be, let's say for any intellectual asset number 1, the paper, intellectual asset number 2, the data set, intellectual asset number 3, the Git for the processing, it should be related to the project goal, objective 1, for example, related to work package 1, for example, and related activities, activity 1 to 5. If you have that assigned in your enhanced DMP, that goes in line to the ongoing aspects, meaning the metrics that you can self-evaluate whenever needed for the updating of the technology's readiness levels, for example, breaking it down for researchers in the way of, let's say asset 1 has 2 dependencies, asset 2 and 3, meaning I don't have my paper until I have clearly defined how I've developed or collected the data sets, plus the actual GitHub that does the code. And last but not least, and this is the part that is still open, but I like this to become an open discussion also here in this community, is what are the reporting aspects of this? And for us internally in the University of Bern, we're talking about FAIR metrics. That is machine-to-machine communication aspects of how all of these assets will be shared as fair as possible. And what is open there is the possibility of openness metrics. That is, what other aspects beyond FAIR are required by the founder? Because if we define that also as part of the list, then it will be easier for us to just report through the DMP while having multiple versions of the DMP. What do I mean with that? Let's go to the last slide, and then I can basically describe it. Oh, sorry, I put this in the middle just to remember that this sounds like a lot of work, but this sounds like a lot of paradigm shifting. And for me, paradigm shifting means we need to figure it out how we're going to teach researchers to do that. And for that, I sort of added this for the role of data stewardship teams. And I made a list of things that we as data stewards should start thinking, not just to tell them use these tools, not just to tell them basically do this, but is rethink what your intellectual assets are. So now we can go to the last slide that sort of describe an example of versioning of data management plans to just justify this. So let's say we have an enhanced DMP with specific technology readiness levels planned and specific FAIR metrics as I described. The idea is you describe your assets in your DMP version 1.0 because that is an internal assessment that you've done, let's say in a consortium level or in institutional level. So in the example of the University of Bern, it would be our open science team says, yes, this makes sense, use it as a DMP, and then that goes to the founder. That comes with the internal metrics evaluated for us and the ongoing TRLs or technology readiness levels to be evaluated. The question is, as long as the project advances, these TRLs can evolve. Therefore, your DMP will evolve. So I put version 1 point something. Now, that is all internal until what I'm suggesting, the midpoint reporting on intellectual asset. That is just basically when you report your midpoint reports, report your midpoint reports. When you submit your midpoint reports to your funder, you can also include an update version of the DMP that I call 2.0, updating the expectations of the intellectual assets to be deliverable. Then this is the perfect point to say, well, actually we planned this, but then we realized the measurement is this, therefore this is the actual asset that we will deliver at the end of the project or at the end of this specific work package. This is, to me, important to make sure that the researchers realize that there's no shame in updating a DMP. It's actually what we actually need to make science as transparent as possible. And that also would include an updated research strategy and or responsibilities per intellectual assets. Let's say during the project, people change in your team, people change in the other institution's team, so you need to reshape things. That can also be recorded in the updated DMP or enhanced DMP, tackling down intellectual asset 1 has evolved during the months like this, and it will be developed and or projected or deployed or collected by means of these new means instead of the ones that we thought before. Now, for the last part is how do you actually present these resultant intellectual assets. I suggest a DMP version 3.0 that you also submit to the funder after the project has ended. That includes all machine-to-machine communication fair metrics for the internal assessment that have been already checked internally for us. Example given in the University of Bern that would be done, hopefully, because we're planning this, by the Research Management Office, plus any other additional machine-to-machine. So this is why the machine actionable DMP really goes in line to this idea. Openness metrics evaluation to be done by the funder, to be done by an institution in between, to be done by a group of evaluators of open science that help the founders and so on. So this is basically it. Thank you. Sorry for the kind of weird presentation, but thank you very much, Magdalena, for the actual helping with the sharing. Now you can stop sharing. I can probably see people and hear some questions.
Thank you so much, and it was not weird at all. Don't worry. I'm glad I could share it, and this was why I was trying to get the presentation just in case something goes wrong. We did receive one question in the chat from Nina. I don't know, Nina, whether you
can you stop sharing so I see something, because I don't see anything because you're sharing.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
There it is. Yeah, now I see people and you and everything. Thanks.
No worries. So we did receive one question in the chat. So Nina, I don't know whether you are able to unmute yourself and would like to ask in person.
Yeah, it seems to me like you're describing a project management, but I actually asked it first and then you said later on, okay, this is agnostic and can go into any project management.
Right. What I don't want is for us to say only this specific tool can do this. That's why I'm talking very general. And I'm saying as long as data management plans follow this hype cycle that Thomas described a few hours ago, and they sort of become machine actionable, you only need this approach to define your intellectual assets, to write them properly, to write them closer to what a machine needs to understand and closer to something that a principal investigator can actually use to track those things. That's why I'm saying you can use anything. If you can use Google Calendar, if you want, you can use any other tool to deploy it. The important thing is to break down your metrics in order to easily report your assets. Is that clear?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm trying to see whether we had any more questions in the chat. If you are having any questions, also feel free now to unmute yourself or just raise your hand. And in the meantime, I'll have a look into our shared notes to see whether anyone was adding a question in here. No, but somebody,
I was adding the notes there.
no, and somebody
I
very
have a question. I have to say I'm a bit ignorant about this. Do you see the smart? You're saying with confidence that the smart approach should actually work with any tool. I just can't figure how you would build in a DMPonline these questions that would enable people to think of their research outputs as intellectual assets.
That's important.
That's my worry.
No. A DMP tool is not an enhanced DMP. A DMP tool is reporting what you've done, right? So a DMP tool, may that be your tool, may that be any other tool, is just summarizing research, right? So because it's summarizing research, it would answer the same questions that they're already there. But internally for you, for your research, or for your principal investigator, or for the data steward that help you, internally, that would be, let's say, tackled and organized by metrics that would help you to internally manage your assets. That doesn't mean, that's why I put it enhanced DMP. That doesn't mean that you need to report all the tracking in the DMP. The DMP sort of remains size-wise similar, but then you have specific, let's call it persistent identifiers that take you to the path of what this intellectual asset was developed by, let's say. So then you have a traceability of your asset starting from version 1.0, when you said it will be a data set sort of this size, so all the questions that the DMP has, and to 3.0, that is actually it was 100 data sets, much bigger. And this is the justification, because the justification is something that evolved internally for the researcher. So it's more transparent in the way that the researcher can actually, if asked by a reviewer, explain how it advanced. But as a DMP level, let's say, you only have the versioning of the DMPs evolving, let's say, month 1, month, I don't know, 12, month 16, month 32, something like that. So from the point of view of you guys, of the data management plan online, it doesn't change that much. What it changes is within the questions, you will have unique identifiers for your internal, let's call it traceability reports.
So what you're referring to is building in data structures, right? A data structure underneath with these metrics.
And this would be great if we advance towards a machine actionable data management plan, because your, let's say, front end wouldn't change that much, but in the back end, much more information would go from the researchers to the actual funders, if needed. And that's the hope, let's say.
Okay, I think I'll be in touch. I'm intrigued. Sorry, very interested, I should say. Okay.
Good, thank you.
Okay. So, unless there are more, sorry, Frederico, you were saying something.
No, I cut it short to make sure that we had a lot of time to discuss, and then I realized, well, maybe I shouldn't have cut that short.
Please don't worry. It's always difficult to predict also the audience because people can come in and out of these sessions. We have been running since the morning, but the recording will be shared once it's being processed, and you are sharing your contact details at the end of your slide. So I hope it's okay to share this with the community in case they'll have some more points they would like to discuss with you.
Sure. Since we have some minutes, can I explain a bit how much have we worked and are we planning on working this specific example type of project within the University of Bern? So starting next month, I'm trying to catch up the researchers as early as possible. So the first draftings of DMPs, not just for them to learn how to use the tools, like, for example, the tool in the community, but also to rethink their intellectual assets. My biggest fear, because it's things that I've noticed already in ongoing DMPs, is that they understand from the requirement of the funder that they need to report everything. And this is noisy for the founder, but also noisy for them, because they spend a lot of time, let's say, opening up a Git just to upload a statistical analysis code. And it's like, if you would have thought about this at the beginning, you would realize that the code or the processing is not the intellectual asset. The intellectual asset is actually the result, and how the result goes in direct to validation with the data set. So then you need to share a data set. So that resets, let's say, your, let's call it, open science strategy within the writing of your data management plan. And if I can retroactively answer one of the questions that came up during the can an AI write a DMP, I would say, yes, it can write a DMP because the DMP is just a result, so I can copy answers of results, but it will never actually build up the description of the intellectual asset to be developed and how that evolves over time, because that's actually what science is, the evolution of the thing. If I already know exactly what I will do, probably won't be that much scientific. It would be like a lot of technical aspects until I finish it. Everything you learn in the middle might be reusable by knowledge transfer by means of how well I documented it. So what I said to the people that I'm working with in the University of Bern is, you need daily transparency for short-term replicability, for long-term reproducibility. If you don't do the daily transparency, it's very hard for anyone to actually, even yourself, replicate what you've done. So this little tool, or sort of more than a tool, approach to rethink intellectual assets, hopefully would help them realize how, let's say, methodical they should be for the transparent daily processing. Of course, what I suggest is to use ELNs, because electronic laboratory notebooks really helped for the daily tracking of what you've done in the lab. But I cannot say only thing with labs work like this. So in a general term, I would think everyone, may that be social sciences, humanities, or whatever, if they rethink it like that, very quickly they realize my intellectual asset is a book. Why am I dealing with code, for example? And if they describe that properly in the DMP and nothing evolves over time big regarding that, the founder cannot go and say, why are you not sharing everything that you should be sharing? Because you would be sharing everything that you were sharing based on your first DMP. I'm only planning on doing a book because I'm collecting data, but I'm not going to share that data, for example. So that is still open science because it's actually trackable. So that's sort of the idea. I just thought a big example might clarify some stuff, since we have the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Federico. I appreciate it.
Oh, there's a question there. Oh, yes. Well, what I would say is that they're harder to, not to fake, but they're easily hallucinationable. What it means is that it's so specific from the researcher actually developing the underlying data of their assets that even if for some stupid reason you share all your internal notebooks and then an LLM can collect them, they're going to clone how you did it, but it doesn't make sense because you did it specifically for that asset. So it would evolve just like for an article in the same way that it would evolve for code, that it would evolve. So it would not be good at understanding how you evolve in the daily basis, even if you just share the information. Right, because and then again, it's very important to say that to be transparent doesn't mean that you need to share everything you've collected every day and every note that you've done. Is to make it findable and properly accessible to reviewers. That's how I see it. But this long discussion to be had, because that opens up the asset of, is my asset really publishable because it can be reused as a data set? Or is my asset just a short example of the data set, enough for me to prove that my technique is what matters? Because maybe my technique is what I'm trying to do as an intellectual asset, not just the data collected, for example. So thank you for your time. I'm glad that I managed to put some examples. And of course, I'm open to questions and or any other contact through my information. Then again, I will answer in June once I'm back in the office.
Thank you so much. And I can already see reusing the term introduced today, or at least first time I heard the term of hallucinations. So great. So unless there are more questions coming in, I think we can wrap up the session before the remaining last two sessions of the day. I would like to say one big thank you again, Federico, for taking your time while being on holiday to present your talk with us. I hope, yeah, like Diana is saying, to enjoy the rest of your holiday. And we hope to have some follow-up with you and get more examples as well, but we will be in touch.